Watching news at Prime. Let's take you back to one of our leading stories of the day. The unemployment statistics for the first quarter of 2023, painting a bleak picture of youth joblessness. The number of unemployed youth has jumped from 3.6 million in the last quarter to 4.8 million in the first 3 months of 2025. The Eastern Cape and Northwest provinces recording the highest unemployment rates, particularly among young people. To react to this and what can be done to avert this rising crisis, we're joined by Ravi Naidoo, CEO of the Youth Employment Service. Ravi, good evening to you, and thank you very much for your time. When you listen to those stats, I'd like to start off the conversation with youth despondency and how dangerously close are we to that reality if you look at the age group of 35 and above.
Yes, so if you look at the age group from, let's say, 15 to 34, it is a big challenge, because this is a persistent problem of youth, high levels of youth unemployment that we've had. And I think, we were making some progress last year, and what we've seen in this first quarter of this year, the period from January to March 2025, South Africa lost 300,000 jobs, as it were, in terms of unemployment increased by 300,000, and it wiped out what was a positive job gain last year from March until December of 300,000. So it was plus 300,000 last year, minus 300,000 this year. It's like the country's doing a bit of a dance, one step forward, one step back. And obviously, if we don't make big surges forward to really create jobs for young people in particular, then yes, we would have a serious problem.
Yeah, and you speak about gains. Perhaps let's try and be positive for a moment. Sectors that have recorded the largest labor absorption rates, these are transport, finance, and utilities. How easy or difficult are they to get into by young people?
I think finance and business services, obviously, important sector. So we would see a lot of growth, in the technology sectors going forward, and of course, in services sectors as well. So tourism did very well last year. And, it went up much more than GDP and so on. So I think there are those positive things that we must, hold on to. But in general, the challenge is we just don't have, over the last 15 years, we got to look at the picture over the last 15 years, because the quarter by quarter assessment can be misleading, because colleague, the issue is, every January to March, we are sad. And we are sad because, the seasonal jobs from December are lost, and then people are leaving school and university and are coming into the labor market, and there's no jobs. So almost every January to March, the situation is worse than what it was in October to December.
Yeah.
So we can, go through periods of being very happy in December, then sad when we see the figures in March. But if we stand back and look at it, we'll see that for 15 years, the economy has not grown faster than 1%. And if you don't, and 1%, remember, the population grows by 1%. So that's effectively, the economy grows by 1%, we're producing slightly more goods and services, but the population is growing, so by the same amount, so it's kind of, we're standing still again. And that is our core problem when it comes to jobs, and particularly youth jobs, that there's no economic growth.
Yeah.
And then the second thing I would say across all sectors is where we have economic growth, how we ensure that economic growth is also labor intensive. Is it easier now to employ a 20-year-old, let's say in the tourism sector or in finance, than it was 5 years ago? And if the answer is yes, then we know we are encouraging youth employment. If the answer is no, we have problems. So I think that really is probably the big issue we've got, is that whenever we have high levels of unemployment, it will always be worse for young people because they are competing without the prerequisite experience. And therefore, you have to find a way to get them to have that first work experience, whichever sector they're in.
That's a very interesting way of looking at this, Ravi, because you're saying, as opposed to quarter, look at it from an extended period. And you've said, for 15 years, the South African economy has not grown. If it has, it's by, as some people would say, it's pedestrian growth. So, which means that we've basically stayed almost the same. So let's look at it province by province then, because the provinces that have recorded employment, or at least recorded employment rates, they were, I think it is the Western Cape, it is Gauteng, and I think the Free State. The rest of them, growth essentially has gone down. And if that's the case, Ravi, you look at a province like the KZN, Eastern Cape, Limpopo, Northwest, Mpumalanga, Northern Cape. These are provinces with large rural parts in them. What kinds of trends should we start anticipating from these provinces among young people?
Well, you'd probably see more frustration in those provinces because if you are in a province, let's take KZN, KZN should be like Gauteng and the Western Cape, doing well because it has, big economic centers, but they really have been a huge underperformer. They haven't been attracting businesses. Businesses and money has in fact been leaving KZN, so you'd imagine. The Durban riots were obviously in KZN, so you are creating social conditions which are very negative. If you take the other, obviously Gauteng is always, in the game, but and obviously people move to Gauteng. It is the most, it has the largest population, even though it's the smallest province, because it does concentrate a lot of economic impact. So it does well, but it's pulling a very heavy wagon, and it's not firing on all cylinders. So I think obviously, Gauteng is important as well. Western Cape is interesting, and it might be politically contentious, but I think the issue is obviously tourism has done well, but they have created the space for tourism to do well, and they have positioned themselves to the extent they can as more investor friendly, and I think. Even though Gauteng and KZN and the rest of the country may not like it, but they do need to take a leaf from the book of Western Cape and try to position themselves in a more investor-friendly manner, because it does have an impact, right? Not everyone has Table Mountain, but KZN has a lot of tourism potential, and as does most of the country. So I think. The provinces are competing a little bit in terms of how they can showcase themselves, and I think the ones that really, remain fast asleep are going to run the risk of, social challenges being obviously something that is more likely.
Listening with a political mind, I can already tell you that the politicians in the Western Cape are jumping for joy, given that they seem to be doing something right in creating employment, while the rest of the country sort of tags along. Let's conclude the conversation around we've spoken about, or you made reference to, economic centers and key provinces we know in the country drive that, and you mentioned KZN, but they just have not come to the party, Gauteng, Western Cape. Load shedding has been a factor, Ravi, for some time, and I can remember 2023 was the year where the country experienced the most severe load shedding. I think it was 332 days of load shedding, and the stages of load shedding were much higher. And coming out of that period of 2023, you obviously would have had 2024 at the beginning, experiencing that load shedding peak, doing very, very badly in terms of job creation. So we now sit exactly at that level because it was 32.9%, the unemployment rate. Why is that, given that last year we had no load shedding, or at least we had next to none? Eskom did very well in shielding the country from that. Should that be a source of worry, the fact that we've had a year where there hasn't been load shedding, but yet we sit here in terms of employment creation or the economy pumping?
Yeah. So I think, yeah, that's an important question because, you know, whatever we do, you know, Collie, we have to sustain it over a number of years, in fact. So it was good that the country turned around load shedding, and we moved from that period to have a lot of renewables come on board, and you could see the impact. There was much. It was a positive thing, and I think we must accept that. It was a very good effort by the government in collaboration with the private sector to fix that. Of course, you got to keep doing that for a few years because companies need to know, investors need to know, is this something you are going to continue doing? And it's not once, you know, it takes a while to get the money to build a factory or do something new. The same thing with the railways, other parts of infrastructure, water. Once we get that key infrastructure working through partnerships, I think altogether that has a positive impact. You can't run a factory with electricity but no water. Then they also want to see, you know, as a country, we spend so much money in education. How do we work to help young people get from education to transition into work? You know, how do we find ways to connect? You know, so we have a lot of talent. So one of the things we also have to look at is all these unemployed youth you're talking about that are social risk. There are many talented young people there. How do we get them into their first jobs? Which is, of course, what the YES program does with companies. It doesn't use taxpayer money, but government has a lot of taxpayer programs. How do you take some of those which are not very effective and, you know, look to make them effective? Maybe also get some of those youth to work in sectors like energy or water, so we can turn our underutilized a resource like youth, you know, actually into an asset. You know, young entrepreneurs who can start businesses that can become, you know, growing businesses in 5-10 years' time. I think that's what they're trying to do in the Western Cape. I think that's what parts of the national government are trying to do. But like we did with the issue of load shedding, I think the answer is going to be whether we can have enough partnerships across a critical mass of interventions, which together, you know, can convince very skeptical investors here and internationally, okay, South Africa is turning the corner, let's put money down in long-term programs.
Yeah.
And when we do that, I think that's when the flywheel starts to turn more than it's doing now. It doesn't really work quarter to quarter or even, you know, year to year.
Ravi Naidoo, thank you very much for this discussion. A very concerning picture indeed.